Hello everyone, thanks for tuning in to another Southern Oregon Weather Weekend Update. We'll start with our smoke outlook. We've had some more smoke move into the area over the last few days, so we want to know when is it going to clear out. We'll talk about our 7-day forecast, discuss some ideas that I mentioned in my previous forecast last week for September, and then finish with some thoughts about our sea surface temperature patterns and our current analogs. So here was the GOES West satellite image from this morning for the Pacific Northwest. You can see most of the smoke is over the south and eastern part of the state, but we've had some smoke in the Rogue Valley too, from the fires in Trinity County, Northern California, and now from the fire in the Grizzly Creek area. The HRRR model is showing this pretty well. This was its initialization this morning in the upper left-hand corner here, and this is an image of vertically integrated smoke. So it looks at smoke in all levels of the atmosphere, not just at the surface. So it's not necessarily this dense right at the surface, but it's giving us a composite blended image of the smoke at all levels of the atmosphere. You can see, though, on the bottom right, in about 18 hours, so tomorrow morning, some of the smoke starts to move out of the area as we come under north to northwest flow. You can see the smoke is kind of streaming off to the south and east. And that's because we're going to come under the influence of the tail end of a cold front that's going to dive down into the Rockies. So here's our current 500 millibar pattern. According to the upgraded GEFS, you can see the big ridge over the Pacific Northwest. And the trough, the cooler air, moving toward the eastern part of the U.S. But here you can see this cold front dives down the backside of the ridge, and the tail end of it is just going to brush us enough to change our wind direction, the direction of the flow, from southwest to north. So that should help push some of the smoke out of the area on Monday and Tuesday. I did want to mention, if you haven't heard, the GEFS, or the American Ensemble, was upgraded. There are now more members, ensemble members, than there were previously, and the resolution is a little bit higher. So we can expect a little more accuracy, hopefully, and the initial results are pretty promising. So there's that to note. So here, according to the upgraded GEFS, that trough moves through, but then that ridge builds right back in toward the end of the week. And so we get a 7-day temperature story that looks like this. We start out hot. Maybe not quite as hot as 106 because we do have the smoke helping keep temperatures down a little bit. But then we cool down for just a day or two on Tuesday, and then we warm right back up again going into the end of the week. Again, if this ridge rebuilds and brings some smoke back into the area, temperatures could be a little cooler than this. That's what we've been observing over the last few days. The smoke has really kept temperatures from reaching the forecasted levels, but in any case, that's the general idea for this week. Hot, a little bit cooler midweek, and then hot again to finish the week. So, a couple ideas from last week's forecast. So we had talked about how we had multiple signals that were showing a cooler than normal month overall, and that some models like the CFSV2 were trying to warm up the entire month, and I thought that was unrealistic. And we had talked especially about this mid-month period around September 15th, where we could see some cooler air. And models are still trying to hint that maybe we come under the influence of a trough that sits just offshore. They're trying to shift this ridge into the central part of the U.S. a little bit. Some of them, like the EPS, really keep the ridge pretty strongly over our area. So it looks like we could still see a little bit of cooler air going into mid-month. This lines up reasonably well with MJO phases 4 and 5, which we talked about last week. And those are cooler than normal phases, and you can see here's the temperature pattern for MJO phase 5 with that cooler air just to the southwest of us, and a suggestion that the ridge shifts inland and brings warmer temperatures to the northern plains. However, there are some factors that are going to override that. Another idea that we had discussed last week favoring a cooler than normal month was our climatology. The last decade of Septembers have on average been cooler than normal, and so forecasters look at climatology because, if something's happened the last 10 times, there's a good chance that it might happen that way again. So that's just one tool that weather forecasters look at, is climatology. But again, there are factors that are going to override that as well. And the factor I'm talking about is tropical activity. So we had 2 big typhoons move through the western Pacific. One was Typhoon Maysak a couple days ago, and now we have Typhoon Haishen threatening southern Japan and maybe the Koreas as well. And what these typhoons do is really alter the pattern of the global jet, our 500 millibar pattern. So you can see the typhoons work their way through the western Pacific, and they pump this ridge up over Siberia. And that in turn causes this deep low to develop south of the Aleutians, and a ridge to build in really strongly over the Pacific Northwest, just downstream. And that sends all the cold air into the eastern part of the U.S. So you can see this 500 millibar kind of wave-like pattern developing as a result of this typhoon activity. And this is significant enough to override climatology and MJO phases and the Southern Oscillation Index. It's pretty remarkable. And this was something that I honestly didn't anticipate. So I was calling for a cooler than normal month on the whole, but it looks like it could end up being a warmer than normal month, partially because of those typhoons. Another factor that we need to consider is that normally positive SOI values mean cooler air for our region. However, in September, the correlation flips, and we have to look for negative SOI values if we want to see cooler air. So you can see there hasn't really been very much of a drop in the SOI over the last 2 or 3 weeks. This little drop right here, happened about 10 days ago. And so possibly that's a signal that in about a week we could see some cooler air. That lines up with that September 14th through 16th time frame that we were highlighting for maybe a little bit of a cool down a couple minutes ago. But you can see since then we've just had positive SOI values. And in most other months of the year, that's a cool signal, but not in September. And so this is another indication, combined with those typhoons, that my original forecast was not on the right track. And that on the whole, I think the month is going to end up warmer than normal. Here you can see those maps showing the weird SOI correlation. The top left here is the correlation that we would typically expect in August and most other months of the year where we have cooler air when the SOI turns positive. But here's the map for September. It's almost polar opposite. We have a warmer signal from a positive SOI. So that's kind of an oddball. And so it means that the SOI has this kind of an effect. The drop here corresponds to our brief period of cooler air, or at least air that isn't quite as hot, and then we have a suggestion that the heat just rebuilds going into the second half of the month. So guys, before we finish, let's check in with our sea surface temperature patterns. We still have a pretty hefty La Nina developing. Not really a strong La Nina at this point, but it looks pretty healthy. Again, there's certain criteria that have to be met for an official La Nina designation. Temperatures have to remain below a certain amount for a certain amount of months. We're not really interested in that in this video yet. It's just worth noting, though, that most of the cooler than normal waters are in this Nino 1.2 region, 1+2 region, along the coast of South America. And so this is kind of an east-based La Nina look. And it's worth noting that that isn't necessarily a very cool and wet signal for our part of the country during the wintertime. If anything, this favors cooler air in the far northern Pacific Northwest and into the Rockies and maybe into New England, but not so much southern Oregon. What we really want to see is the coolest waters develop in this ENSO 3.4 region. And some of our analog years had that kind of a configuration where we had the coolest waters in this area here, more of a central-based La Nina, and that's what we really want to see for a cold and wet winter. So going forward into October, we touched on this briefly last week as well, that along with September, our analogs were also favoring a cooler than normal October. September has turned out to be kind of a bust because of the typhoons, but I'm still willing to trust the analogs for October, partly because our SOI correlation becomes normal again, for lack of a better way of putting it, in October. And so we get what we would typically expect. A positive SOI gives us cool temperatures. And with all the positive SOI anomalies we've seen recently, I think this could persist in October and give us some cooler air. Here again is the map from 2005 and 2016, this composite 500 millibar map. In those 2 years, it was cooler and wetter than normal, and so I think that could happen in October. Some of the seasonal models are showing this as well. The Canadian model is pretty similar to this blended analog look. So I'm willing to stick with the analogs for now, even though obviously they couldn't compete with the typhoons for the September forecast. They could do well in October. So let's recap all that information. We have some smoke over the area currently, but that's looking to possibly clear a little bit Monday into Tuesday. I think we could see some pretty clear air under northwest flow as we catch that trailing edge of the cold front moving into the Rockies. We do have the ridge coming right back with some more heat for mid and late week. Again, because of those typhoons, Maysak and now Haishen, that really amplify the jet and the 500 millibar pattern and pump that ridge up over the Pacific Northwest. We do have MJO phases 4 and 5 and that brief drop in the SOI, trying to bring in some cooler air mid-month, but I don't think really that's going to last very long. I think this pattern that the typhoons have set up could hang around through the end of the month, and we do have that weird SOI correlation where just for September, positive SOI anomalies give us warmer than normal conditions. So that's what we've been seeing recently, a positive SOI, so it makes sense that the heat lingers for most of the month of September. I'm still willing, though, to trust our analogs for October, because that SOI correlation becomes normal again in October, and so positive SOI is finally going to give us some cooler signals in October. And seasonal models are picking up on this as well, so that's my forecast for October. We'll see if I do better than I've done so far in September. But guys, thanks so much for listening. Don't forget to set your notifications so you can see that next weekend update as soon as it arrives. And don't forget to leave a comment if you enjoyed the forecast.